Work.
All right, cool. And we're live. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning in to Wild 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 Cards. I'm Mike Lafferty here with Ross Watson from Star Anvil Studios. How you doing tonight, Ross?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. And let's play our it starts slow but builds to a frenzy theme music. Just 1 second. And Wild 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 Cards is a new Savage Worlds focused podcast under the umbrella of MAM Podcast. And we're here with Ross tonight. We're going to be talking about Savage Pathfinder and taking a look at the complex but charming chase rules in
They
Savage World
are
Adventure.
complex and charming. I actually got down my special edition Suede book, and I have the Chase Rules bookmark there with the little colorful bookmarks, because this is actually in response to a request we had from our first show to cover the Chase Rules.
The chase rules, they involve drawing randomly from a pack of cards?
2 decks of cards, in
Two
fact.
decks of cards. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So chase rules are one of those things that does, in my experience, comes up fairly rarely in Savage Worlds, but it is a cool little subsystem that gives you a way to run a cool or an interesting chase, or uh, any kind of operation where you're trying to get from one place to another place for a reason. This could be cars trying to get away from the biker gangs in the post-apocalyptic wasteland, or it could be you're running across the bridge while the Balrog is chasing you through the mines of Moria.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
you could find come a lot of different ways to do chases.
All
Um,
right. So I found this website called randomcards.com, which lets you do this is just a randomly generated deck of 52 cards here.
Right. So, one of the interesting things about the chase rules, it actually uses 2 distinct
Hmm.
sets of cards. Um, so first, you're going to decide. The game master is going to basically decide, like, how many groups are involved in the chase.
Hmm.
And the reason for this is because a chase can be like a starship fleeing from an armada, so you have everybody aboard the one ship, or it could be,
Hmm.
you know, three of the party are on a covered wagon in Deadlands, and the other 2 are on horses. So basically, you need to split up the participants into whatever groups that exist,
Hmm.
and it may be like everybody's on their own, like a foot chase, across the bridge with the Balrog. But once you've determined those groups, okay, then you're going to draw cards and put the lead group basically on the card to the far left, and the trailing group on the card to the far right. Okay. Now the
Okay.
example given in here uses 5 cards. Let me just double check that to make sure I'm clear. Uh, Deal them out in a row. 9. So they recommend 9 cards for most
Okay.
chases.
So you would deal out 9 cards from 2 decks of cards.
No, well, you use one deck specifically just for these cards,
Okay.
because they represent the relative locations of the groups in the chase.
Okay.
So the rearmost, I'm sorry, the rearmost is the far left, and uh to the right are the people ahead of them. And you add more cards to either end if someone falls behind or surges ahead. Okay.
Okay.
Then this tells you also your range, because the number of cards in between you and, or between your group
Hmm.
and the next group, tells you how far apart you are, and they have different range increments depending on whether you're on foot, or whether you're in a plane, or whether you're in a starship or something like that.
Okay.
Basically, if you're on foot, each card is 5 feet. Okay. If you're on an airplane, every card is 25 feet, and if you're in a starship, every card is like 50 feet. That
Okay.
just gives you your range. Okay. That also tells you, like, if I'm firing a weapon at a car, behind us, what range, is it in range for our weapons, things of that nature. So now you got your cards out there, right?
Mhm.
Now you take the second deck.
Mhm.
And the second deck is your action cards. Now, you've played Savage Worlds before, right, Mike?
Yep. Yep.
So the action cards are your initiative.
Mhm.
And those are dealt out as normal between the different participants.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, these are not dealt out per group. These are dealt out per player.
Okay.
And that is your initiative. But in addition to that, the cards dealt for the action cards have one special feature. If anybody gets a club as their action card and their initiative card, that represents some kind of complication that arises during the chase. To determine what complication arises, you use the card on the track and you use that suit.
Mhm.
And that tells you what the complication is. Okay. So, and like I said, it's complicated, right? Because
Yeah.
you've
Yeah.
got two different sets of cards. You've got uh, cards that affect the other deck, things of that nature. And there's special actions you can take to surge ahead, to pull back. Um, it's actually it's pretty deep, and I don't want to go through every single option.
Yeah. It sounds
I
like
think
it's a whole mini game. Sounds like.
right, it would be kind of a waste of time to go through every single option. But
Okay.
be assured that if you are a Savage Worlds player, there is probably a way to do what you're thinking of you want to do. Okay,
Mhm.
it's just in those options that are available there, and whether or not you have a complication or whether the bad guy has a complication. And you can fight, you can shoot, you can. I
Mhm.
mean, most likely it's almost always going to be shooting, but I suppose in a fantasy game you could ride your horse up next to somebody and whack them with a sword. So
I
those
see that
things are all
happening in the Deadlands too, sabers or whatever.
right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the more interesting ways to do a chase, I did in the adventure for Savage Rifts called Murderthon,
Mhm.
which is actually a race between you and other groups through obstacle course or through various other challenges and things like that. So you can use a chase. The only limit really is your imagination. Like any kind of situation where you're moving, uh, whether that be
Mario
space or in a
Kart.
car, huh?
Mario Kart.
Mario Kart. Yeah, you could do a Mario Kart. Any kind of thing like that. Chase rules can apply. So they are not simple. I will argue. Definitely a GM should take a few minutes and read through this just to get it all up in the noggin, because it's not the normal. It differs from the standard rule resolution in Savage Worlds, but it actually is really super cool. And as a Savage Worlds guy, I could see myself using this probably once or twice every so often. I would probably
Mhm.
pop it up, maybe once every 3 or 4 sessions. I might do a chase of some kind. You're trying to get away from the avalanche.
Mhm.
Or the volcanoes exploding behind you, and you have to outrun the lava. I've actually done that one,
Mhm.
and I really want to do a whole setup where you're having to lure a monster across a really rickety bridge spanning a huge chasm in some kind of underground, you know, dungeon of some kind. I think that'd be super fun.
That would be cool. Or you're skiing down some slopes, and your paper boy is coming after you, saying, "I want my $2." You gotta try to get away from him.
$2.
$2. Oh
This
well.
entire mountain is made out of snow. Do you know what the street value of this is?
All right. All right.
Better
So
Off Dead. What a great movie that is.
it was a good one. So one of John Cusack's best.
Yep.
So Pathfinder for Savage World, it's been out for a couple years now. I played it once on the Banff podcast, actually, with a couple sessions on our lunchtime beat 'em ups on Mondays, and that was a lot of fun. Just did a short little, hey, some gnolls have kidnapped a boy from the local village. Go sort that out. But I was pleasantly surprised that I've kind of had a block for years playing fantasy RPGs just because, oh my god, the combat tends to just kill all my fun. But Savage Worlds solved that problem because, whoo, it's fast, fun, and furious. So I was pleasantly surprised with it.
Yeah, and I think this is actually kind of the first of what I hope will be a series where we kind of go over various settings for Savage Worlds. Pathfinder, of course, has a setting called Galarian.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're like me, you may have played the Kingmaker or the Wrath of the Righteous computer games, which give you a pretty good overview of the setting. But essentially, if you want to run a fantasy game like Dungeons and Dragons using Savage Worlds, Galarian is a pretty good one. Like there's a region with just about everything you would ever need in there, and it has, if I remember correctly, it's got like 8 seas. Let's see here, 8 continents and like as many seas, if I'm not mistaken. Which is pretty great. There's frozen deserts. There's all kinds of different biomes that you can encounter. One of my favorite areas is called the World Wound, which is this maze-like series of canyons where demons emerge from, which is actually part of the setting for Wrath of the Righteous. And the Stolen Lands, of course, which was where the Kingmaker was set, which is this sort of bandit and monster infested area that is sort of troubled, let's say haunted, by a particularly troublesome archfey, who is basically trying to tear down any attempts at civilization. So it can get really interesting really quickly. It's got your pretty, fairly standard fantasy tropes. There's orcs, there's goblins, there's dragons, there's dungeons, there's hordes of gold, there's caves and underground expanses of underdark-like areas. There's
You're trying so hard
forests,
not
rivers.
to say dungeons, aren't you?
Well, I mean, yeah, I tend to, there's the colloquial dungeon, and then there's like what actually is a dungeon, quote unquote. But so like, is there a particular area you would want to adventure in? I could probably tell you about it if it's in Galarian.
I am not so familiar with Galarian. In general, when I've been doing fantasy gaming, it's been online and usually just straight dungeon crawling. Fighting, beasties in a 10x10 stone room connected by corridors to other 10x10 stone rooms. Playing a lot of Darkest Dungeon, if you've ever heard of that one.
I love Darkest Dungeon.
Yeah.
A dizzying blow to body and brain.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. Some of it creeps me out. Some of the expanded content has been, engaging but creepy. And the way you can leave a dungeon and you pick up a random illness as you leave, and sometimes it's just like vertigo, and other times it's like, oh, you have syphilis. What was my character doing in that dungeon? How did this happen?
Yeah, well, Darkest Dungeon is definitely got its own particular vibe going on, and I would honestly love to see a RPG setting with that whole aesthetic. But yeah, there's 5 oceans and 9 seas on Galarian. That's a lot. That's a lot of seas and a lot of oceans, yo. Even compared to our world, that's a lot.
That's an awful lot of water. I think people in Galarian, I think there's a lot of potential for pirates and campaigns and seafaring adventures.
Which is something I really, really enjoy. I told you about that frozen desert. It's called the Crown of the World.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically the North Pole.
Okay.
You can imagine it. It's like if the Arctic Circle was Siberia. It's kind of an interesting way to look at it. There's the ruins of Aslant, which is like the first civilization, and then they sank beneath the sea when a meteor hit them and stuff. It gets pretty deep. But one thing the Pathfinder setting has that a lot of other fantasy settings don't have is they have a built-in paradigm for adventure. Like if you're going to play in the Forgotten Realms, you can work for the Harpers, or you could work for the Zentarim, or you could find that old man in the tavern who gives you a treasure map. Okay, and that's all fine and good. In Pathfinder, they have a thing literally called the Pathfinder Society. And the Pathfinder Society is an organization of adventurers, ex-adventurers, retired adventurers, hangers-on, friends of adventurers, etc. And they kind of collect information about quests or deeds or rewards, things like that. Often they are sending people out. The Pathfinder Society is to come back with some kind of ancient lore, or to discover the origin of a particular item, or even just find out the history of this particular place. So there's a little bit of a scholarly approach to the Pathfinder Society, which is kind of neat. And that's the thing that sort of sets Galarian apart, I would say, from say Greyhawk or many of the other sort of established fantasy settings. As a GM, it's very handy to be able to say, well, the Pathfinder Society wants you to do this. And off you go.
Certainly get you out of the, as you say, meeting in taverns and talking to the old guy in the corner named Johnson who has some errands he wants you to run.
I don't know about you. I've actually seen several games get derailed before they ever pick up that plot hook, because somebody in the party will be like, hey, is that guy eyeballing me? Or I'm going to tell that elf to get out of my seat. And the next thing you know, a bar brawl breaks out, or the guards get called, or yeah. And meanwhile, the DM's like over there, like, okay, so there was this guy in the corner with a treasure map, but he leaves during the fight. Yeah. Or as the tavern burns down, there goes my clue.
Yeah, it can bar brawl the RPG is kind of what I call that sort of stuff, where people are tangentially interested in, hey, let's do adventuring, but hey, I'm going to role play whatever's happening in this bar right now, and they get sucked into it. And next thing you know, shenanigans.
Honestly, there's nothing really wrong with that. There, in the right group with the right players, that can be a howlingly entertaining episode. Maybe not entirely for the GM. Like, I mean, if the GM is like cool with it, then that's one thing. If the GM is like, guys, I planned for 8 hours, that's different. But I will say that from time to time, I do enjoy a good, we walk into the tavern, like rock stars moment. So
I'm 100% with you. I honestly think there should be a small focused RPG just about shenanigans in medieval taverns, just to cater to that specific niche. But it can be a lot of fun.
Anyway, so yeah, that's Savage Pathfinder it's such a big setting, and I mean, I got to be honest here, it's kind of a tropey fantasy setting. Like there are individual things in Galarian that are interesting and cool. But it's hard for me to say, like if we were going to talk about Eberron as a setting, like I could talk about all the things that set Eberron apart from other fantasy settings. Galarian is a perfectly serviceable fantasy setting. It's got some really interesting NPCs and really interesting locations, but at the same time, it is more or less a standard fantasy setting, and you should just know that going into it. Like it has all the things you would expect to find in a standard fantasy setting.
Well, I mean, given how Pathfinder was created, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, well, it really does. Like it's built purpose built to be, a good adventuring area, but at the same time, it also means it's just not that standout. But and I don't mean to make this sound like I'm slamming Galarian, because Galarian is really cool and I do enjoy playing in it. But so we have future episodes that we're going to talk about other settings. We're going to talk about maybe other parts of the Savage Worlds rules. What do you think, Mike? Is there a particular setting or particular Savage Worlds rule that you would like to check out?
I'd like to know more about the sci-fi companion when it comes out. I've talked to Peg, and they've mentioned they might be able to give us a preview at some point. I've got a project I'm working on right now specifically Savage World sci-fi. So I'd love to see some more, of that. But
Well, we could talk about Last Parsec, which
mhm.
is a specific Savage World setting for sci-fi, or we could talk about Saints and Sinners or Battle Lords of the 23rd Century, like we had on just recently. There's actually quite a few sci-fi settings for Savage Worlds that we could, if you want to pick one, or if one of the if one of the listeners wants to let us know, hey, I want to hear about X Y Z, uh, hit us up.
Yeah, definitely, that'd be a lot of fun.
I think it'd be fun to talk about hindrances sometime soon, or it'd be fun to talk about um, attributes, or any particular rule of Savage Worlds that has some interesting little quirks and like how it works. And I have my concerns. Like there's areas of Savage Worlds that aren't necessarily my favorite things. And we could talk about that as well. But it's a really, really good rule set, and there's a lot of great stuff in it. Dramatic task resolution is something we could talk about, which is really, really cool as well.
Okay.
So,
Well,
yeah,
I'll tell
don't
you
be
what,
shy, listeners. Tell us what you think.
maybe we should put up a poll on the official Savage Worlds Facebook site, see if we can get some feedback.
That would be pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Hey, don't forget to check us out. We are listed, or we're going to be listed. I don't know exactly whether we are or not right now, but Savage Universe, we've been keeping up with them. We've been letting them know when we're broadcasting and what our subject matter is. So you can usually find us there and find out more about what we're going to talk about next.
All right. Cool. Sounds
So,
good. I think we have covered this conversational vein pretty well. Anything we want to say before we wrap it up?
well, we could be like the dwarves and delve too deep if we go much further.
Who knows what
Uh,
we'll find?
but again, I will say Galarian. I know I kind of said it was generic. It is not generic. It's actually really cool, but at the same time, it has all of the things you would expect to find. And I really am trying to make that sound cooler somehow. The words are failing me right now. I think you
Well, I
get
mean,
what I'm trying to say.
it is the single most popular genre for role playing games. People play role playing games, and 9% of the time they want to play adventurers in a medieval fantasy. And Savage Worlds is a way to do that without encumbering yourself with maybe all of the crunch that can come if you're playing other rule systems. And that's for me, that's the big selling point of Savage Pathfinder. I don't have to worry about attacks of opportunities or encumbrance or some of the other shenanigans. I can just jump in, and it's a fast, fun, furious system, and I'm familiar with it. And combat can be over just like that, as opposed to I can remember the old days playing second edition, and combat starts, and like, okay, order a pizza. We're going to be here a while.
Oh, remember weapon speed and
Yeah,
armor factor, and
yeah.
there's a lot of that. But okay, I will say this: if you want to start playing in Galarian and you don't know where to go, my recommendation would be to look at the Stolen Lands, the River Kingdoms. Those two areas are really good, rich, full of opportunities for low-level adventurers to go out and do in low-level Savage Worlds, novice rank adventurers to go out there and make a difference and find something interesting and cool to do. So that's where I
Have,
would start.
have they been releasing the adventure paths for Savage Worlds?
Rise of the Rune Lords is
Okay.
definitely out. That's a great one as well to start with, and I really hope that they do Kingmaker, because Kingmaker's freaking awesome.
Sweet.
And actually, Wrath of the Righteous. Well, they so recently they did a Kingmaker version that was based on and expanded by the computer role playing game,
Mhm.
and I happen to have that. They are probably, I presume, they're thinking about doing the same thing with Wrath of the Righteous and re-release it with the expanded material from that version of the game. But there's tons of adventure paths out there, and it's easy as pie to grab the Pathfinder adventure and just replace all the stat blocks with stuff from the Fantasy Companion for Savage Worlds very easily. Like a lot of that stuff is just drag and drop. It's right
Cut
there.
and paste. Here's a Nolan Pathfinder. Here's our Savage World version. Go. Yeah.
Precisely. Yeah, precisely. So one thing I think that is just for game masters, keep in mind is that death is not exactly easy in Savage Worlds. There's the incapacitation table. Uh, Heroes in Savage Worlds tend to be a little more resilient. They just it's harder to die, it's harder to lose a limb, but there is the quote unquote death spiral because every time you take a wound, you start suffering penalties to your attributes. So just keep that in mind if you're used to playing Pathfinder, used to GMing Pathfinder, and you're doing the Savage Worlds version. Your players can probably survive more than you think. Well, the player characters can survive more than you think. If you're worried about your players surviving, I don't know if I can help you with that.
That's call a doctor. So
911.
All right. Well, hey, we'll put up a poll. Try to find some other rules areas to talk about, and next time we'll delve into some sci-fi action and Swade.
Yeah, you want to talk about Last Parsec because we can
let's
talk about
Last Parsec. That'd be a good time.
Right.
So,
all right, cool.
All right. Thanks everybody for checking us out. We will see you, say 2 weeks.
Yep. Take care.
2 weeks. Take care.